있을까?
U.S. President Donald Trump has extended its ultimatum to strike Iranian power plants by 5 days, raising hopes for a diplomatic breakthrough. He says Washington is holding productive talks with Tehran, but Iran flatly denies there have been any negotiations. And South Korea's cabinet approves bills creating the Public Prosecution Office and Major Crimes Investigation Agency, finalizing a major restructuring of the nation's criminal justice system. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un labels South Korea the most hostile state, warning of merciless retaliation over any provocation. His remarks come as he secures a third term as chairman of the State Affairs Commission. We begin with the situation in the Middle East. Roughly 12 hours before the end of his 48-hour ultimatum to Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 5-day pause on his deadline, citing alleged communication between Washington and Tehran. Iran, however, flatly denied any interaction. Our Kim Do-yeon leads our coverage tonight.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced a sudden shift in military plans against Tehran on Monday, saying that talks between the U.S. and Iran have seen progress. While Iran denied that discussions had taken place, President Trump ordered a 5-day postponement of threatened attacks targeting Iranian energy infrastructure. Trump had given Iran 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on its power plants, but has shifted his stance as that deadline approaches.
I think there's a very good chance we're going to end up in a deal. And so we're giving it 5 days, and then we're going to see where that takes us.
The U.S. leader indicated that initial contact could pave the way for a permanent resolution to the ongoing conflict and address Washington's core demands.
So we are now having really good discussions. They started last night, a little bit, the night before that. And I think they're very good. They want peace. They've agreed they will not have a nuclear weapon.
The suspension is being closely watched by U.S. allies in the region. After a call with President Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emphasized that any diplomatic outcome must secure his country's strategic goals.
President Trump believes there is a possibility to leveraging the mighty achievements obtained by the IDF and the U.S. military in order to realize the goals of the war in a deal that will preserve our vital interests.
Tehran, however, remains firm that Trump's claims are fake news, with officials accusing Washington of fabricating the talks to buy time. The Iranian military also dismissed Western intelligence reports about the deployment of explosives in regional waterways and reaffirmed its control of the Strait of Hormuz.
Given this level of control and capability, there is no need to lay mines in the Persian Gulf. However, if necessary, we will use all available means to ensure security.
With the 5-day suspension now in effect, Washington's deadline for a negotiated resolution has been extended to this Saturday. 김도현, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung has highlighted the importance of a proactive stance to better address the broader potential fallout from the ongoing unrest in the Middle East. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Devising an emergency response system in a preemptive manner so that the conflict in the Middle East does not pose grave threats to lives in Korea. That's what President Lee Jae-myung has instructed his officials to do, with response measures topping Tuesday's cabinet meeting agenda for a third straight week.
각 부처는 수급 우려 품목을 포괄적이고 꼼꼼하게 점검하시고 또 그것들이 국민의 일상에 미칠 영향 그리고 대체 공급선은 어디인지 등을 세밀하게 파악해서 최악의 상황까지 가져간 대비책을 철저하게
With global oil prices rising, authorities will update the fuel price cap rule and announce it later this week. The president also vowed to strongly punish any attempts at price collusion, adding that the prosecution has launched investigations into oil refiners.
정유업계도 국가기관 산업으로서의 공적 책무를 깊이 인식하고 국가적 위기 극복 노력에 함께 동참해 주시기 바랍니다.
To reduce private vehicle use on workdays, public institutions will adopt a system limiting use based on the lost digit of license plate numbers. As for private firms, Lee asked them to join the campaign to save energy. President Lee revisited the need to swiftly organize a war response extra budget.
왜 세금으로 지원하냐? 빚내서 지원 또 하는 거냐? 퍼주냐? 왜 지역화폐로 주냐? 뭐 이런 등등의 지적이 있어요. 그래서 이번 추경은 초과세수, 예상되는 초과세수로 하는 거지 빚내서 하는 거 절대 아닙니다. 그리고 빚내서 만약 초과세수가 없었다면 빚을 내서라도 해야 돼요.
He added that tax revenues exceeded expectations in the second half of last year as the economy started to improve. All this as the International Energy Agency warns of the greatest global energy security threat in history. South Korea is one of the world's largest energy buyers, with the Middle East being a major source. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The U.S. Iran conflict is forcing Washington's allies to navigate growing security and energy risks as the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively disrupted. They are under dual pressure as Tehran is threatening further retaliation against Gulf infrastructure, while Washington demands allies join its cause. For more on how the Allied response is taking shape, we turn to our reporter Oh Soo-young, who joins me live in the studio with us. A big welcome, Soo-young.
Great to be with you, Morgan.
So I was to ask, how are American allies responding at this point? It seems as though they're coming with a joint response.
Yes, as you said, it does rather seem that U.S. allies are moving together to jointly respond to this dual dilemma that they have. they're exposed to the shipping and energy fallout from the Strait of Hormuz, but for many reasons it's untenable to send military support to secure the waterway as the US is demanding. On Sunday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte told Fox News that a group of 22 countries, including South Korea, Japan, the UAE and Bahrain, were now coming together to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And that came after last Friday's joint statement led by Britain, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Japan and Canada, which was later widened to include South Korea and others. The signatories said that they were ready to contribute appropriate efforts to secure passage of the Hormuz and stabilize energy markets. However, they did not commit to any military action or deployment. Mark Rutte himself also didn't make any such declarations. He rather played to an American audience, though. He emphasized the need to secure the Hormuz and the dangers that an Iranian nuclear weapons program would pose. And this is what experts had to say.
Right now, most countries are trying not to appear as though they'll join U.S. military operations. They're aiming for some kind of arrangement with Iran through negotiations to secure safe passage. So statements like this are just enough to signal that they're not all opposed to the U.S. That seems to be the guiding principle and the limit of most countries' actions.
Nations like France, South Korea, and Japan all do not want to become involved in the war with Iran, but they cannot simply refuse the U.S. So they're considering ways to contribute in other ways. This war with Iran doesn't seem to have a clear mandate that can justify the sacrifices made to participate. That is why governments cannot help but be cautious.
Right. So it seems as though they all have a cautious stance regarding this. But what are they actually doing, Soo-young?
Well, they are taking great steps to manage the situation diplomatically, I would say. It's an incredibly precarious situation where Tehran has threatened retaliation against regional energy infrastructure if its own power facilities are struck, while also warning of wider disruption around the Strait of Hormuz. On Monday, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun spoke with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, urging Tehran to stop strikes on civilians and civilian facilities, and he also called for safe navigation through the strait. And Cho also spoke with his counterparts in the Netherlands, France, Oman and Kuwait over the past 24 hours. Tokyo has always it's also communicated with Tehran about the passage of Japanese-related vessels. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has also spoken with Araghchi and separately with officials from South Korea, Turkey and Qatar. So what we're seeing here is that US allies or aligned partners, they're really trying to keep those direct lines open with Iran while also consulting with each other as they press for restraint and, of course, the free and safe navigation of vessels along the strait.
Right. So we are now about a month into this current conflict situation. Where do you think things could go now from here?
Well, I would say it's absolutely vital for the allies to maintain this dialogue channel, to maintain this diplomacy, because, well, as much as President Donald Trump has been, politically calling on allies to help out the US in the Strait of Hormuz, it's absolutely politically untenable to actually sell this war to these democratic nations. They're public, especially with this lack of mandate. So what's key going forward is for these allied countries to continue this conversation, to keep those direct channels open with both Washington and Tehran, really pushing them to de-escalate. And going forward in the longer term, I would say it's a huge inflection point for allied countries to really think about their longer term security options. And this is what experts had to say.
Countries in similar circumstances, such as South Korea, Japan, France, Germany, and the UK, should form a security network among themselves. When the U.S. is unable to focus on the Korean Peninsula or on Europe because of Iran or some other issue, it becomes important for countries facing similar challenges to prepare, not a substitute, but some kind of supplementary mechanism for security.
Well, we'll certainly hope for the situation to de-escalate as soon as possible. Thank you so much for your report today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Turning to the economy, a dramatic drop in the price of gold has unsettled investors in recent times. Our correspondent Park Jun-han takes a look at the reasons behind the plunge in price.
The price of the safe haven asset gold has been showing volatility in recent months. Hitting over $5,600 per troy ounce in late January, the gold price as of Tuesday is trading at around $4,300, down over 20% in just less than 2 months. Largely, this is due to fears stemming from the conflict in the Middle East outweighing the demand for gold as a safe haven. This comes as a surprise, as during geopolitical tensions or periods of uncertainty, demand for precious metals such as gold and silver, among others, is boosted. Instead, surging oil prices triggered by the war have reignited fears of global inflation. Also, higher energy costs are reducing expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve and other central banks will cut interest rates at their upcoming rate-setting meetings.
But the biggest thing probably is investors are concerned that it's had a big run. They're concerned that there are not going to be interest rate cuts. So you're going to lose more opportunity cost of holding it versus getting some type of interest off of gold.
Because gold prices are sensitive to interest rates, oil prices, and the value of the dollar, any meaningful peace deals in the Middle East and eased inflation risks could help gold prices bounce back. Despite the sharp correction and short-term volatility, major banks have not lowered their 2026 targets. JP Morgan forecasts gold reaching $6,300 per ounce by the end of 2026, while Bank of America maintained its $6,000 target. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
The United States is stepping up pressure on countries, including South Korea, to give up their developing country status at the World Trade Organization. A new reform report argues the current system gives unfair advantages to advanced economies. Kim Jun-hong explains.
The United States is stepping up pressure on countries, including South Korea, to give up their developing country status at the World Trade Organization. The U.S. Trade Representative released a reform report on Tuesday, signaling Washington's intent to crack down on what it sees as free riding within the WTO system. Citing U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, the report describes the current global order in international trade as untenable and unsustainable. Washington argues that reforming special and differential treatment, or SDT, is key to restoring the organization's credibility. SDT allows developing countries greater flexibility, including slower tariff cuts and extended timelines for implementing trade commitments. At the heart of the issue is the WTO's binary classification of developed and developing countries, which Washington says no longer reflects today's economic realities. Under the current system, highly developed economies can still self-declare as developing countries and receive preferential treatment. The report points to 4 countries: Brazil, Singapore, South Korea, and Costa Rica. It says that although such nations pledged to forego SDT provisions in past negotiations, they still retain self-declared developing country status. The United States also outlined reform steps proposing stronger incentives for countries that comply with notification requirements by properly reporting trade-related measures. Washington also called for clearer objective criteria to determine developing country status. Based on the report, the U.S. is expected to press hard for reform at the WTO Ministerial Conference, set to open in the coming days. Rising protectionism driven by the tariff policies of the Donald Trump administration has put the multilateral trading system under mounting strain. South Korea chose to keep its developing country status in 2019 while opting not to seek the associated benefits. Kim Jun-hong, Arirang News.
South Korea's cabinet today approved 2 bills aimed at stripping prosecutors of their investigative powers. The bills stipulate creating 2 new agencies, one that will exclusively handle investigations under the Interior Ministry and the other in charge of indictments under the Justice Ministry. The investigation agency will look into 6 major crimes, including corruption and those related to the economy or drugs. The current prosecutor's office will be abolished in October, the first major change in 78 years following decades of debate over readjusting the prosecutor's powers. The legislation was led by the ruling Democratic Party amid objections from the main opposition People Power Party. South Korea expressed strong regret on Tuesday over Japan's approval of high school textbooks that claim Dokdo as Japanese territory, urging immediate corrections. The foreign ministry summoned Hirotaka Matsuo, deputy chief of mission at the Japanese embassy, to lodge a complaint, saying the country cannot accept any such claims. Seoul also protested Japan's approval of textbook passages that downplay the coercive nature of wartime forced labor and sexual slavery by the Japanese military. The ministry stressed that a correct understanding of history among future generations is essential for building future-oriented ties between the two countries and urged Japan to take a more responsible approach to history education. And across the border, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reaffirmed his commitment to nuclear weapons and renewed his hostile rhetoric towards South Korea, warning of harsh consequences if Pyongyang is provoked. Lee Seung-jae has this report.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has formally labeled South Korea the most hostile state and warned of merciless consequences if Pyongyang is provoked. According to the Korean Central News Agency on Tuesday, Kim made the remarks on the final day of the first session of the Supreme People's Assembly, declaring that Seoul has now been officially designated as North Korea's principal adversary. He warned that South Korea would pay the price for any provocation and reaffirmed that North Korea's status as a nuclear weapons state will never change, vowing continued efforts to confront what he described as hostile forces. The comments came as Kim secured a third consecutive term as chairman of the State Affairs Commission, the country's top policy guidance body created in 2016. His re-election was confirmed during the parliamentary session held on Sunday. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated Kim on his re-election and expressed hope for deeper cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang. In a message released by the Kremlin on Monday, Putin praised Kim's role in strengthening what he called a friendly and allied relationship between the two countries, adding that continued collaboration would serve their fundamental national interests. Ties between Russia and North Korea have strengthened in recent years. The two countries signed a mutual defense treaty in 2024, and North Korea has sent troops to support Russia's war effort in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov also said Kim has a standing invitation to visit Russia, noting that Moscow would welcome him once diplomatic channels finalize the timing. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And on the big screen, the film The King's Warden continues to gather moviegoers, ranking third on Korea's all-time admissions chart. Our correspondent Cho Young-eun has more.
Over the weekend, the film drew more than 800,000 moviegoers nationwide, holding the #1 spot for a 7th consecutive week and bringing its cumulative audience to 14.84 million. With this milestone, the film has become the third most watched movie in Korea's box office history, following The Admiral Roaring Currents, which drew 17.61 million viewers, and Extreme Job, which recorded 16.26 million admissions. Since its release on February 4, the film has shown no signs of slowing down. Directed by Jang Hang-jun, it marks his first film to surpass 10 million admissions, a milestone that even the director himself said took him by surprise. The film has also set a new all-time revenue record, surpassing 142.5 billion won, according to the Korean Film Council. The drama follows the exile of young King Danjong during the Joseon Dynasty, captivating audiences and gaining widespread popularity. Amid this, the cast has been actively meeting audiences through theater events, further spotlighting the film's semi-historical narrative.
We never expected this much love for our film, and we don't know how to thank everyone enough.
There will be various programs where you can experience King Danjong's story more closely. We hope many people will join.
The film's broader cultural impact is also gaining momentum, With its unpredictable box office trajectory, the King's Warden is setting a new benchmark for the Korean film industry, drawing attention to where its final total will land. As it approaches the 15 million mark, the film will also be screened nationwide from April 6 to 20 in an inclusive format featuring audio descriptions and Korean subtitles. Its overseas rollout is gaining momentum. Having launched in the U.S. on February 13, it is now screening in over 50 cities across the U.S. and Canada, further expanding its global reach. 조영은, Arirang News.
In other news, BTS fever is spreading beyond the concert stage in Seoul. Museums are welcoming global fans with special exhibitions and events. Jung Hae-rim shows us how.
BTS's comeback show may be over, but fans can relive the energy in Seoul. Following the weekend concert, major national institutions are welcoming the influx of global fans with special exhibitions and events incorporated with Korean culture. At the National Museum of Korea, fans can view traditional artifacts such as the 10-story stone pagoda and moon jar, pieces known to have captured the BTS members' interest, with an English guide provided. But the experience goes beyond the exhibits. A major highlight is the exclusive collaboration between BTS's fifth album Arirang and the museum's official merchandise brand Mute. Fans have been buying items ranging from traditional Korean-themed hairpins to modern clothing and bags, blending Korea's rich heritage with the group's new music.
I think that's the highlight. Like they try to incorporate the national treasure, if I'm not mistaken, like the bell, into the merch. So I think it's a really nice touch. Also Korean, also BTS.
Over at the National Folk Museum, games that members actually played from the popular YouTube show Run BTS have been brought to life. The outdoor K-Playground offers tourists a chance to try their hand at traditional games like spinning tops or 팽이, 투호, 제기차기, and 딱지치기. Visitors laugh and show enthusiasm for Korea's oldest games. Bullseye or not, games like 투호 and spinning tops offer a truly unique experience. By playing traditional Korean games, fans aren't just having fun. They're connecting with their favorite stars on a whole new level. Over at the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art's dedicated listening space, Love Quarter, fans dive into a completely different vibe. Bathed in blue light, the space is filled with BTS's new title track, Swim. Paper installations move with the wind like ocean waves, giving visitors the surreal sensation of swimming through the music as they read the lyrics surrounding them.
It's great. I mean, it has like a lot of like the lyrics, and it's really nice to see it. It really feels like you're in the ocean, so like it's a very immersive experience.
The cultural celebration extends to other venues as well, featuring a BTS time capsule at the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History and an exhibition of Korean literature that inspired the group's music at the National Library. Jung Hae-rim, Arirang News.
It really feels like spring is settling in, but with stagnant air, fine dust is building up. Tomorrow, ultra-fine dust levels will reach bad across the capital area, the Chungcheongdo provinces, inland Gangwon-do province, and Jeollabuk-do province. Meanwhile, rain will begin on Jeju-do Island late at night and by early tomorrow morning. It'll spread to the southern coast before tapering off around midday. Rainfall will remain light, less than 5 millimeters along the southern coast and around 5 to 10 millimeters on Jeju-do Island. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 8 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 4 degrees, Busan at 11 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 19 degrees, Chuncheon at 21 degrees, Jeju at 18 degrees. Once the rain clears, we'll see clear skies nationwide through the weekend, with large day-to-night temperature swings continuing. That's all for Korea. Here's a look at the weather around the world.
And that's all we have for tonight. Thank you for watching. This was Kim Mo-gyan filling in for Kim Dami, and I'll be back with Within the Frame at 8:30 p.m. Korea time, so stay tuned.
I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Arirang TV on its 30 years jubilee. You have a global presence and the mission to connect the world, to make us understand each other better. And I think that from my perspective, you're doing a very good job, and you are also contributing to increased understanding between Sweden and Korea. So once again, congratulations and good luck with your continued work. Thank you.
From breaking news in South Korea to stories from around the world, we're here to bring you the news that matters.
Truth, clarity, and impartiality. And that's what we uphold in a fast-changing world.
We go beyond the headlines, offering depth, context, and perspective.
This isn't just news, it's our commitment. News you trust. Arirang News.
Knock knock! The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Poli Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms carry on by your side, you can become a Cabian master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-Animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-Gyan. Tensions in the Middle East remain high as the war that began with U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities enters its fourth week. President Donald Trump has paused planned attacks on Iranian power plants for 5 days, saying Washington is holding productive talks with Tehran, even as Iran denies any negotiations are taking place. At the same time, the Strait of Hormuz remains a major flashpoint, with concerns growing over possible disruptions to global shipping and the risk that the conflict could spread across the region. To help us understand where this crisis may be heading, we are joined by Choi Hyun-jin, professor of political science at Kyunghee University. A big welcome, Professor.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Robert Lawrence, professor of English and Turkic Studies at Dongduk Women's University. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
So let's start right away. First of all, with Professor Che, the war that began with, U.S. and Israeli strikes, it's entering its fourth week now. How would you assess the current state of the conflict?
So at this point, I would describe the war as intense, but still it is under control. The United States and Israel are continuing naval and airstrike, mainly targeting Iran's key military and also nuclear facility. At the same time, they are continuing intelligence operation. They're targeting some of the key hardline Iranian elites. However, there's one important point. There has been no deployment of ground troops yet. And this shows that both the U.S. and Israel are trying to avoid a full-scale war. On the other hand, on the Iranian side, the regime has not collapsed. The system is still functioning, and the Iranians responding in a limited but strategic way by threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, and also by carrying out limited and also strategic military actions against Middle Eastern neighboring countries. So what we are seeing right now is a form of so-called a controlled escalation. Both sides are applying diplomatic and also military pressure, but they are also trying to keep the conflict from escalating further. So the key question now is whether the U.S. and Israel can force Iran to make a meaningful concession, such as the complete closure of its nuclear program. So far, we have not seen such level of success. And because of that, the current situation is what I call is a very fragile balance. And this kind of balance is not likely to last. So rising oil price and economic pressure mean that this situation is not sustainable in the long run.
Right, it's very uncertain and also concerning for a lot of us. But beyond the battlefield itself, the humanitarian toll is also growing, with thousands of civilian casualties and major damage to hospitals, infrastructure, and even cultural sites. Professor Lawrence, how might this rising civilian cost shape international pressure to possibly stop the war?
Well, certainly in the last 48 or in the last little bit since the 48-hour ultimatum and the ensuing retaliatory threats have happened, there's been a flurry of diplomatic activity in the region. The escalation implicit in both threats raise a great deal of international pressure and concern. Once we start looking at cities with no electricity and no desalination capabilities, some of these countries rely on 100% of their water coming from desal facilities. So, this becomes a very dangerous situation, and it can become dire quite quickly. It's also something that would take a long time to fix. So, regional diplomats have been busy at work. Turkey's Hakan Fidan has been extremely busy working with regional counterparts. The Iranian foreign minister, even though they said that there were no talks going on, he's been very active in speaking with multiple regional and international counterparts. And there are talks about a possible meeting in Islamabad. But we'll see if that actually happens or if anything comes from that as well. Another key lever that might have an effect on decision makers is domestic pressure coming from the U.S. While he's a difficult man to read, it is an election year, and economic pressure in the form of cost of living might really hurt his party in the midterms, which in turn would hurt his political ambitions as well. So there's also a great deal of disagreement within Donald Trump's base as far as getting into this war in the first place. And the longer it goes out, the less patience there is amongst that group. So that might also pressure him into trying to find an off-ramp. But he does tend to hold his own counsel, so he might already have decided that the military objectives are succeeding at a pace that will yield strategic dividends, and he'll stay the course.
So as our Professor Lawrence has just mentioned, another flashpoint in this conflict is the Strait of Hormuz, and President Trump had warned Tehran to open the waterway within 48 hours or face attacks on Iranian power plants, but he's now paused those strikes for 5 days while talks continue. Professor Che, how significant is the Strait of Hormuz in this conflict?
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points in the world. About 1/5 of the global oil are passing through this narrow waterway. So even a small disruption in this area can quickly push up global energy price. And that's why both warring parties are being very careful. The United States wants to keep pressure on Iran, but at the same time, the U.S. wants to avoid a complete closure of the strait. And we can already see the impact of this risk. Even in South Korea, the people are starting to feel it in our daily lives. As crude oil imports from Middle East become harder, there are growing concern about the supply of plastic products, for example, the garbage bags. So this shows that the Strait of Hormuz is not just a regional issue, but it has a direct global economic consequence. And we also saw very clear market reaction as well. So yesterday, the President Trump announced that there would be 5-day pause in the airstrike. And right after that, U.S. stock market immediately went up and the global oil price went down. And these tell us two important things. The first, the global economy is very sensitive to the war in Iran. And secondly, the world is eagerly waiting for stability in the Strait of Hormuz. So in short, this area, the Strait of Hormuz, is a key pressure point. And also what happens there can not only shape the outcome of the war, but also the global economy.
Right, definitely all eyes are on that strait. Now, Iran has warned that the strait could be fully closed if its infrastructure were attacked. And now we're hearing the U.S. is pausing the strikes while talks are expected. Professor, could this week become a turning point in the war? What do you think both sides are actually calculating right now?
Well, it certainly could be a turning point, but it depends if there's real buy-in from both Iran and the U.S. If nothing happens, there could be an escalation that takes a long time to recover from. Like Dr. Che said, the global economy is extremely sensitive to what happens in the Strait. And there's a mountain of distrust between the two sides that may be too difficult to overcome in 4 or 5 days. The Iranians have said that they believe that this is a tactic basically to help oil prices and Wall Street and to buy time for the U.S. to get more troops in the region, hinting at the deployment of U.S. Marines that are en route and the possibility of a combat brigade from the 82nd Airborne. I'm not sure that that's been actually ordered into the region yet, but there's talk about it. And from the American side, I think it's tough to tell if the Americans believe that anything has really changed from the January negotiations that they deemed fruitless. So, time will tell as far as that goes, if it's actually going to be a turning point. Regarding calculations, I believe that Iran thinks it has a higher pain tolerance, and it'll be able to outlast the U.S. and Israel by basically imposing regional and global costs that the U.S. will find intolerable. By all accounts, Iran seems determined to drag it out and end the conflict on their own terms. It seems that they want a post-war recognition as gatekeeper to the strait that it can probably use as a deterrent against any future attacks and arguably reshape the region in its own favor. On the other hand, regime security, depending on how bad circumstances get, might force the Iranians to look for an acceptable off-ramp so that they can live to fight another day. The Trump administration, has been pretty consistent in saying that it's not going to follow any predictable line of messaging. And as we've all seen, there's been a great deal of mixed messaging going on. So it's very difficult to say with any degree of certainty what exactly he's thinking as far as, what his calculations are. But for the sake of argument, I'll give it a whirl. He might be looking for an off-ramp because he sees a very real impact that this is having on the global economy and on regional allies, and of course his domestic base. He might be going into these talks to see what Iran can offer, and if they offer something good enough, he might take an off-ramp there. Or despite domestic and international pressure, he might have already determined that the benefit is worth the cost, and he's going to keep going until he thinks Iran can't project power outside of its own borders. And also doesn't have a way back in doing so. So I think it'll be interesting to see if any more assets are moved into the region in the coming few days or week. There's rumors that the USS George H.W. Bush Strike Carrier Group is set to deploy to the Middle East, but that hasn't happened yet. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few days with that.
Right. We've just touched upon, the situation in the ground. Professor Che, you've mentioned a while ago that there are apparently now no ground troops deployed yet. But we hear some reports that Washington is really moving nearly 5,000 Marines towards the region and also is considering deploying about 3,000 elite paratroopers, potentially for an operation targeting Iran's key oil export hub in Kharg Island. How realistic is the prospect of a direct military involvement from the U.S.?
Oh, yeah, that's a very important point. I still believe large-scale ground warfare is still unlikely. The U.S. still prefers naval and airstrike because sending ground troops there would be very costly and also risky. But however, what we are seeing right now is some different possibility. It is a limited and highly targeted ground operation, such as deploying Marine and elite paratroopers to secure key locations, such as Iran's main oil export hub at Kharg Island. And this would not be a full invasion, but it would be a focused mission to control critical infrastructure and to increase pressure on Iran. And so I see this as a form of military pressure for negotiation. So in other words, it is designed to show what could happen if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed or if negotiations fail. From a purely strategic point of view, this makes some sense. If the U.S. can truly disrupt Iran's oil export capacity by controlling this island, it can increase economic pressure and force Iran to reconsider its position. But at the same time, this operation is also risky because once ground troops are deployed, it becomes much harder to control escalation. So in short, a limited operation could be possible, but I still believe a large-scale ground war is unlikely because the risk and costs are simply too high. And of course, this is my interpretation, and I could be wrong.
Right. So while military buildup is significant, a ground operation would still definitely carry a lot of risks. Now, Professor Che, at the same time, President Trump says the U.S. has held productive talks with Iran, like I've mentioned, and he paused the planned strikes, but Tehran denies any negotiations are actually taking place. What do you make of these conflicting claims?
So this sounds very strange. But this kind of different signal is actually very common in this kind of crisis. The United States wants to show that diplomacy is making some progress while maintaining strong military pressure. And that's why Donald Trump is saying that the talks are ongoing and there are some agreements on key issues, such as the closure of the nuclear program. On the other hand, Iran has a very different incentive. It does not want to appear weak before its domestic audience, and that's why it denies that any talks are taking place. So what we are seeing right now is not necessarily a contradiction. I think this is a strategic communication gap. So both warring parties, the U.S. and Israel, are sending different messages to different audience. So in reality, there may already be some indirect and quiet communication behind the back channel, through back channels. And this is important because negotiation like this could become a turning point in this war. If talks really succeed, we could see some de-escalation or ceasefire. But if they fail, the conflict could escalate further, including even full-scale ground warfare. So I would say this is a classical case of pressure and diplomacy happening at the same time. So before the public, both sides are fighting and competing, but behind the scene, I think they may still be talking.
Now, speaking of diplomacy, it seems as though the conflict is also affecting global diplomacy. The planned Trump-Xi Jinping summit has reportedly been delayed until the Iran war subsides. What does this delay tell us about the broader geopolitical impact of the war, Professor?
So this delay shows how much this war is affecting global politics nowadays. The Iranian war is no longer just a regional issue. It is now affecting superpowers around the world. For the United States, now the Middle Eastern crisis is a top priority, and that's why Donald Trump is delaying the U.S.-China summit until the situation becomes more stable. But at the same time, China is also heavily affected. China depends on stable energy supplies coming from the Middle East. And this energy goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So this war in Iran is putting lots of pressure on China as well, mainly through energy price and the economy. And we should also know that delays like this can affect the U.S.-China relations in general. So we need a close coordination between the two superpowers to handle key issues like trade, tariff, global supply chain, and the stability of South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. And therefore, in this situation, we are losing this important opportunity. So the war is not just about Iran. It is already affecting global diplomacy and economy, and even delaying the key meetings between the two superpower leaders.
Definitely. The impact, it's really extending beyond just the Middle East. And South Korea is also engaging diplomatically regarding the situation. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun spoke by phone with Iran's Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi, urging Tehran to ensure safe navigation through the Strait of Hormuz and also help stabilize global energy supply. Professor Lawrence, do diplomatic calls like this do you think it could influence behavior during a conflict like this?
Well, in course with other countries, yes, I think this type of diplomatic engagement can influence behavior. But as one country who's closely aligned with Iran's main adversary, the U.S., it's probably not. It's probably more symbolic. But this is when the information battle space that is so important in modern warfare comes into play. The U.S. needs its allies, and the U.S. has asked its allies to do more to help to get the strait open. Some have stepped up in different ways, but some allies, especially in Europe, would probably react better to a more cordial tone in the administration's rhetoric and a little less coercion. Initially they've been reluctant to hop on board with President Trump's style of conducting the war, but we'll see if that can get turned around. I think that it can. It just takes some clear messaging. They need to clearly articulate why this war was necessary and the threat that it argues Iran poses. And I think that would go a long way to making a much more palatable narrative that would encourage more allies and non-allied nations to pressure Iran to open up and allow ships to go through the straits. As of right now, I think the international PR battle is just not getting the attention that it deserves.
Right. And with all of this happening, and we're also like almost a month into this current situation, Professor Lawrence, what do you think could ultimately determine the direction of this conflict?
No, so that's really tough to predict, of course, but I think it probably relies on a few factors in the outcomes thereof. So, first, can regional and international actors apply enough pressure to create fertile ground, on which negotiations can actually take place? Number two, have the sides already made up their mind, or are they actually negotiating in earnest to try to find an off-ramp and an end to the war? And then three, arguably the most important, is can they bridge this trust deficit and come to a solution that allows both sides to save face and claim some degree of success rather than sticking with maximalist demands? War is inherently unpredictable, and small variables can end up having second and third order consequences that are completely unforeseeable. All of this could change during the course of this interview, but I think the third one is the most important, and it's the most difficult. And if it isn't accomplished, then I think there's a higher probability that conflict continues.
So the next few days would definitely be very crucial in determining whether this crisis would escalate or move towards diplomacy. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Lawrence.
Thank you.
And of course, Professor Che, we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay tuned and engaged.
The snow is accumulating rapidly. Temperatures are dropping fast.